As is tradition, this build is slightly different than what would be considered the meta composition currently of Furnace and Gogok, or Furnace and Pain Enhancer. I am proud to say, however, that after extensive testing on the PTR, this build will be at most only one Greater Rift weaker than that meta composition, but is much more engaging to play. Here I'm using Echoing Fury in combination with Pain Enhancer. Echoing Fury at 5 stacks gives 75% attack speed, additive with gear, but has only a 4-second duration, meaning you must focus on trash and continue kill streaks to maintain this bonus. This does not exclude elites as targets, but devalues them as targets, especially if you have only low density and no means to sustain the Echoing Fury. Pain Enhancer is a rather risky pick as well, because it provides no defensive quality, but will also allow our attack speed to scale exceedingly well with density. Pain Enhancer and Echoing Fury work very well together because when one is down, the other will help increase or reduce your frames per attack, increase your attack speed, and compensate when the other one is not up. It is my belief that this build has great potential given the right Rift, Pylon, and Rift Guardian spawns. However, given its proclivity towards small mob types and Rift Guardians with adds, this potential is very difficult to fish for. But that to me, along with all the other dynamic elements this build features, make it a more engaging and very appealing option. Please keep in mind that the Firebird's level of power will likely be decreased soon. As this discussion is more about relative power, though, let us proceed with a little bit of examination. As you can see on this Greater Rift 144, we have maps that could be considered less than desirable with so-so pylons, and yet I still managed to secure the clear. To give some perspective of where the build currently is in relation to the Furnace variation, on the PTR leaderboards we see many top players clearing Greater Rift 150 with about 45 to 50,000 int, and most with roughly twice my current Paragon allocation. Based on this current level of int, the difference would give about roughly 3.5 Greater Rifts worth of power increase over my test composition. I could definitely clear 145 with more fishing. 146 would be sort of tough for me, but I bet a skilled player, an even more skilled player than myself, could make it. I put my clear potential at currently about Greater Rift 145.5. Considering 150 minus 3.5 Greater Rifts is a Greater Rift 146.5, this is where I figured that this Echoing Fury variation isn't as far off from the perceived meta composition as many players may think. I urge you to give it a try. The dynamic attack speed mechanics have kept me interested in the build, even when I did not have faith in it. All it takes is that one beautiful rift and a perfect Saxtra's binder or Hamlet finisher, and you will believe, just as I have. Greetings, Kratic here. So if you're interested to see the rest of that Greater Rift run, it was a nice one by the way, you can click the timestamps in the description below. And so before we get going, I wanted to show you this alternate variation that I tested also on the PTR. Does not have the Squirt's necklace, has the Endless Walk instead with the Rigmarole Grandeur, and actually 2 different sets fitting in both the Oghilds and the Captain Crimsons. Really interesting gear-wise. Gameplay was not as interesting to me, however, it did seem to survive fairly well, even without the Ashnagar's Blood Bracer or the Aquila. So if you're looking for a build to possibly try out earlier in season especially, it seems to perform very well at lower Paragons, maybe this is something you can try out. Let's get into this build mini guide now. So, of course, we have the Fragment of Destiny, the Shame of Delcir, attack speed multipliers for this particular build, going to allow our Flame Blades to attack rather rapidly, super fast. And then on top of that, it's going to have more of a trash focus with this build, particularly because we're opting for Echoing Fury, not Furnace, meaning that we don't have as much elite damage, but the breakpoints that the Echoing Fury provides will give us a general damage boost and also allow us to stack Stricken faster than a Furnace build might be able to in certain situations, which is pretty neat. We are running the Pain Enhancer here, also increasing our attack speed with density. This will let us squeeze out those last few breakpoints near the lower end of the frames per attack range in particular. Going to be super cool. I will show a little bit into the attack speed later, but first let's look at where we're getting the attack speed from. We have attack speed on weapon, both rings, and the gloves. And you're going to want these as high as possible. I know in the Great Earth run on the PTR, I actually went for an average damage ring on one of my rings, but this was not optimal for attack speed breakpoints at all. It was actually really bad. I dropped a breakpoint without Echoing Fury stacks. I was down one breakpoint from where I could have been, actually. And the only reason I did this was because I couldn't find anywhere else to place my control impairing effects secondaries, and I definitely felt like I needed at least 2 of them. So that was something I was sort of playing around with in testing, but I would definitely recommend the higher breakpoint if you want to push as high as possible. So keep that attack speed on the second ring. Something to note with the attack speed, let's switch on over to a template that I have here I use for attack speed calculations. I want to be able to show you something a little bit interesting. So you note here are all the attack speed values that we can input, and then it will spit out basically our character's APS, which is pretty cool. The Enchantress now gives us 6% attack speed, and then we have the 21% in total from the gloves and 2 rings, 7% on the weapon, which is multiplied by the base. It's separately from the additive gear. And then we have the Echoing Fury, which is going to be placed here in the additive category. 5 stacks gives you 75%. So when we only have 1 target, but still have 5 stacks of Echoing Fury, we get 3% from Pain Enhancer. That gives us a total of 3.22. So we're at this breakpoint right here, 8 FBA, which is super cool. And you can see this on the character sheet as well, 8 FBA. Now, once we increase the Pain Enhancer to 10 stacks, I believe, that bumps us up a breakpoint, which is a huge, well, not a huge increase in DPS, but it's a very nice increase. As you get lower and lower on these FBA values, as you have a high Echoing Fury stack count combined with high density, you will shred enemies. You will get such a high increase in DPS and stack Stricken so much faster. It's insane. And I'll put up some values on screen right now, just showing you how much DPS you could get from these increases with Pain Enhancer and Echoing Fury. Anyways, going back to the chart here, something I wanted to show you though is without Echoing Fury applied, and we have only 1 stack of Pain Enhancer here. This puts us at 2.0972 attacks per second, which, as you see here in our Shame and Fragment chart, gets us barely over the 12 FPA, into the 12 FPA breakpoint. So if you don't have perfect attack speed affixes, say you have only a 6% affix, you bump right back down into that 13. So this is why I was saying that last ring slot being perfected is actually very important. However, like I was saying, if you don't have that second crowd control impairing effects affix, you can opt for it because Pain Enhancer does scale up with density. So if you're fishing for a Rift Guardian with ads and you're just banking on that to be at your highest potential, then that's something you can do, just to have those multiple, wait out and get those multiple targets and go with a slightly lower attack speed. Just note that where your Echoing Fury is going to provide attack speed is going to be very off, and you will require those extra targets. I actually preferred, especially, you know, with getting a single target Rift Guardian, to have that slightly higher attack speed, lower FPA was actually quite nice. Anyways, let's jump on back to here. We have, and this is going to be true for our lower Paragon setup as well. So we're taking a look at the weapon. You want int on the weapon, int on the glove, going to help out greatly with lower Paragons. Int Vitality defensively, you're going to want a lot of Vitality, a lot of life percentage. One cool thing with this build is because we're not including the Captain Crimsons, we don't need a lot of CDR. You just need enough CDR to keep up your Explosive Blast and have it proc the second portion of your Focus and Restraint bonus. So personally, I found 17 to 20% CDR, I believe it was, somewhere in that range. So either two 10% affixes, which you would get from Paragon and the Enchantress's CDR skill, or you can roll with an 8% CDR on the shoulder piece and 10% from Paragon, and then go with the Enchantress's 10% elemental damage percentage affix. So either of those compositions will work well. It's just what you want to opt for and what you feel comfortable with. Resources provided mainly from the Shaman Del Seer. Notably, you still have to place a Arcane Power on crit affix on your source. And it's kind of silly, but it actually helps out greatly because we're using the Aquila. Something you're going to want to do, of course, in Paragon, you want that max AP, you want those max Arcane Power rolls on your wand and your source, just making sure to boost that as high as possible. Higher the range means this 10% at the top of that range where your Aquila is active will have a little bit more leeway to play around with, which results in your Aquila having higher uptime. On top of that, the 4 APOC, coming back to that, is required because we are still channeling Disintegrate to keep up our stacks. And even though it decays slower, you still need to tap it often to reignite enemies. New summons come up often, so we're actually channeling Disintegrate often enough that our Arcane Power, without having a lot of resource cost reduction, considering that we have such high attack speed, will be spending so much Arcane Power that this Arcane Power and crit roll is basically required. In density, this will sustain, especially in density, the APOC will sustain and your Aquila will not drop. Now, as you can see here, we have a lot of multipliers. We have Focus and Restraint, the Bastions of Will set, 2.25 there. We have a 2x multiplier with the Squirt's Necklace. Shielding going to be very important with this build, and conversely, Toughness. Looking at that Toughness, like I was saying, Vitality, very important. Going back to the Paragon, you're going to place about 700 points is what I'm recommending here. Yeah, life percentage on the shoulder piece, the helmet from the Amethyst, the chest piece, take Vitality off of here, put life percentage on there. That's actually slightly better. Though if you happen to get a chest piece with Vitality instead of life percent, that will be okay. Life percentage on the belt as well, giving you a nice rounded level of toughness here. One of the other benefits of the high attack speed, aside from Stricken stacking and increased DPS, is actually shielding because we're using magic weapon deflection. This will generate shielding even faster once we ramp up all of our attack speed and give us that much more toughness, you know, pseudo toughness, and prevent the Squirt's Necklace from dropping. Galvanizing Ward, giving us a large shield, a little bit of buffer for those larger hits when we take larger hits. And then we also have the Teleport Safe Passage, allowing us a lot of toughness when we are moving around. The Unwavering Will is completely opposite. It gives us toughness when we're standing still. So in either situation, you are covered. Something you have to watch out for, though, is if you get knocked back, immediately teleport after that, because you will not have the Unwavering Will, and you will not have the Teleport Safe Passage bonuses up. Therefore, you will be slightly weaker and more vulnerable to taking damage through your shielding and squirts dropping, and therefore, that's very bad, actually. So with this particular build. For that reason, I have included a lot of armor increasing bonuses, including energy armor. So one thing with this build that I noticed with the Echoing Fury is that you're focusing a lot on killing those enemies. Consistent damage is key. So because we're taking the Pain Enhancer as well, we don't have any toughness from this gem like we would with the Gogok. Gogok gives dodge, this does not. So we have to make up for that in some way. And a lot of the meta push builds are using the black hole with the Spellsteal rune, giving us a lot of additive damage, which is highly beneficial in density. However, I found with this build that I was both breaking squirts more often, and I had more issues with keeping Echoing Fury up when I was including the black hole Spellsteal into the rotation, just because it took up so much time casting, it took longer to reignite enemies. Keeping my stacks up was much more fluid with including the energy armor instead of the Spellsteal. However, I have gone the offensive option here with Pinpoint Barrier, giving us a lot of crits, so higher base crit, always a nice thing. If you want to, you can opt for the Force Armor, but I kind of felt like with the increased attack speed, this was not necessary, even on those higher end pushes. So super cool. One other thing I forgot to mention with the shielding, the Ashnagar's Blood Bracer, doubling our potency, going to be very huge here for increasing our toughness. And yeah, it's a very fluid build. We have the Orb of Infinite Depth, giving us that 80% DR. Firebird set as well, giving us DR. Note on the passives here, we do have Elemental Exposure, giving us that nice 15%, because you're only going to be able to get a little more. It's actually multiplicative, so 5% times 5% times 5%. So a little bit more than 15%, maybe 16% multiplicative. We do have the either cold or lightning damage. To get that third stack, you're going to want either cold or lightning damage on your wand. So if you don't have that, you can opt for a different passive, perhaps even blur if you're wanting to balance that toughness a little bit better. But overall, I found this to be a good composition. You could also opt for configuration. It would help you crit even more. That's also an option. And yeah, going the Arcane Rune on Disintegrate, going to also help us here to apply the third stack of Elemental Exposure. Chaos Nexus is going to be preferred here for igniting enemies in a push because the Chaos Nexus discharges at nearby enemies, and it discharges at such a rapid rate. It's actually really nice in a push because you can focus on other things other than igniting enemies, and you can just let your Chaos Nexus discharges ignite enemies automatically. So that's super cool. Granted, it won't ignite enemies that are farther than about 20 yards from your characters, so you kind of still have to direct the beam if you're wanting to pre-ignite enemies in that range that are farther away. But aside from that, Flame Blades giving us elemental damage, extra elemental damage pool here, super cool. This devalues the choice of the Enchantresses 10% a little bit, but still worth going after the Enchantress's elemental percent option once you get to higher paragons especially. So once you get to 3.5k paragon, you can think about starting to swap out those gems for armor gems. You can start to think about placing that CDR on the shoulder piece, either in place of the resource or in place of the vitality, subbing in your paragon to make up for the loss there. And then you can also opt for the Enchantress's 10% elementals. So these were some of the minor differences with the build once you get to those really high paragons, but overall I just felt like it was such a very cool, well-balanced composition, and I hope y'all enjoy this one in a push. Convention of Elements going to be a big deal, of course, in our rotation, so hopping into those Oculus rings, making sure that you're well positioned for that fire cycle, especially trying to get, like if you have a single elite, trying to get that damage onto that one elite and stack that Stricken onto that elite while also killing trash and keeping up your Echoing Fury bonus is just, oof. It's difficult, but it's exciting, man. It's really good. So hope you enjoy this build, and take care.